and they were listening to him gladly, he said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law, who like to walk around in their long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplace, who choose the reserved seats in the synagogues and the best places at feasts. They take advantage of widows and rob them of their homes, and then make a show of saying long prayers. Their punishment will be all the worse." And by the way, these teachers of the law, these are people who teach the Torah. These are not lawyers by our standards, but these are supposed to be the religious people that really have it down. But of course, they're robbing widows. So I'm not sure how much they have down. As Jesus sat near the temple treasury, he watched the people as they dropped in their money. Many rich men dropped in a lot of money. Then a poor widow came along and dropped in 2 little copper coins, worth about a penny. He called his disciples together and said to them, "I tell you that this poor widow put more in the offering plate than all the others." For the others put in what they had to spare of their riches. But she, poor as she is, put in all she had. She gave all she had to live on. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. If you've been coming anytime for any of the sermons on the Gospel of Mark, you might be getting a little dizzy, because I am. Jesus keeps turning all the values we have upside down, right? If you want to save your life, lose it. Whoops, upside down. Leadership is servanthood, upside down again. Love is power, upside down again. Jesus keeps turning everything upside down. And as we get to this passage, we again find Jesus putting us up on top of our heads instead of vice versa, because he says 2 tiny coins are a lot. And a lot isn't much. Again, he's turning things upside down. Now, I love this picture that people like to hang out across from the treasury and watch as people put stuff in. You know, I'm a big people watcher. My sister and I can make up lots of good stories about people when we're waiting at the airport or something. And so, you know, there's a lot of people watching. But what's interesting is they're watching how much people are putting in. And they can tell if it's a lot or a little by their standards. And I can picture them saying, as someone drops in something that they can tell is a lot of money, and they go, "Just think what the temple could do with that money. Wow, those are great people." And of course, those often want to be sure that everybody knows that they're great people. But when the woman drops something in, the first thing that comes to their mind is, what does she even bother? It's not enough to make a difference. Why doesn't she just keep it for herself? Now, most of us are probably somewhere in between the two of them, because we're not rich, and so we can't give out of an abundance so that we still have gobs of money left. But neither are we like the widow, who is just like the widow that Dick read about in 1 Kings. Because both those widows had only a little bit to live on for part of a day, and then they were done. So this widow, when she took everything that was in her pocket and put it in the box, she gave her life, in a sense, because she had nothing more to live on. Widows in those days were really ripe for, because if they didn't have a man like a dad or a brother, somebody who would take care of them, once their husband died, they were very close to dying. In fact, still there are in some countries widows who have to sell themselves and their children into slavery, so to speak, kind of indentured servants, so that they can live, and then they never are able to pay back because they have no way of really making money. And that was even worse in those days, not much worse really, but so she's giving up her life. and her livelihood. This is it. 2 tiny coins and she's done. But it is, in our day, so much like it was in that day, I think, that oftentimes money talks. You ever heard of that? Money talks. And we usually listen. And I heard at a conference some time ago now of a church where a person, I don't know how old this person is, he's not too close to death, I don't know what I think about it, but he has told everyone has put the church in his will because he doesn't have any family, and they are going to get all his millions when he dies. Now, some people say it's $1 million. Some say, oh no, I heard it was $15 million. And so everybody has got a little disagreement about how much this is. But it's a lot of money. Well, that's fine. He can make this promise. I could promise to give you guys $1 million when I die. I mean, what do I care if you find out I have $1 million when I die? But, because I'll be gone. But, so anyway, this is kind of a strange thing anyway on this guy's part, I think. But the problem is that an issue came up in that church and major conflict developed. So this guy who claimed he's willed his millions or whatever to the church weighed in on this issue and said, if you don't do what I want to do, I won't leave that $1 million to you, or millions. So, what would you do? Well, the movers and shakers, most of them in that church, said, oh, okay. So they are doing what he wanted, and there's even more conflict in the church. Money talks. Unfortunately, it says we don't have to trust God. We can trust that millions. Just think what the church could do with $1 million. And of course, he can promise anything he wants. But we think it's a lot. And God would look on that millions and say, he hasn't given anything. He's trying to buy something for himself, but he's not giving. No, 2 tiny coins is a lot. But that's just a little. We have oftentimes a good idea of how much money we have in our pockets, how much money we can use here and we can use there. And I think of this woman, I think many of us might have said when we found out that's all she had, said, what are you thinking? What are you going to do now? And she would have said, well, what I always do, trust God, depend on God. I haven't made it this far without that, so I give something to God. I just trust him. I don't know what will happen. But oftentimes we trust that we have at least this much in our pocket, so we're going to be okay. And we don't want to push things too far. And I'm not saying we need to be unwise, but I do think we need to trust God with our whole selves, like that woman did. There's a Sunday school teacher of boys, probably about the age of Jackson and Remington. And so you know that she had her hands full. But one day she decided to find out what the kids would give to missionaries. So she said, she had about 8 or 9 boys. She says, okay, how many of you would give $100,000 to missionaries? And they all raised their hands and said, yes, 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 I'll give it. And so, of course, they don't have that, right? And then she says, well, how many of you would give 1,000? Oh, everybody, yes, yes, yes. Well, how many would give 100? Yes, 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 yes. Well, then she got down, how many of you would give $1 to missionaries? Everybody screamed yes but one. So she turned to Johnny and she said, well, Johnny, you didn't say anything this time. And he says, well, I have $1 in my pocket. He didn't want to have to give up something he had. And sometimes that's kind of hard for us because we still don't get that God's lots is not always as much as we think, but it's giving to God and trusting God that somehow, some way, God is able to do what we can't do with the gifts we give him, not just financially, but with service. We're not doing it to get something back for ourselves. We're doing it out of what we talked about last week, loving God with all our heart, our soul, our mind, and our strength. It's not always easy to trust, but the more we do, the more we see that God really does make a lot out of a little. One of the stories that I've told probably to Presbyterian women, but it's always just a fascinating story to me, back in the early 1800s, well, about 1800, 1802, some Presbyterian women out east were very concerned about women in the West, especially in Utah. And there were no schools at that time in Utah. There were only the LDS Church, and the women and children they felt like weren't very valued. Now, in the early 1800s, women did not have a lot of money that they could use for themselves. It's not like today. Well, not that they should have a lot of money, but women have more say over their money today. So what these women did, they decided they would start what they call the least coin. In fact, at our PW lunches, we still give a least coin offering. So they would have a little money left over from going to the grocery store or probably buying from vendors, and they took, and every time they met, or probably every day, they put whatever little bit they had left over in to a little place. And now, they and their family were supporting the church. They were giving quite a bit already to the church. This was second giving. This wasn't, they didn't take it 2 cents out of this over here. And they put it aside, and they put it aside. And with that little bit of money from these few women, they were able to send, I don't know how many, but I would say 5 to 10 single women to Utah and Idaho and support them financially 100% so that they could start schools and start Sunday schools. The church that I pastored in Soda Springs, Idaho, was started by just such a woman. Actually, she went to Montpelier, started a school, started a Sunday school, and when some people came to Soda Springs, they said, come on over here and help us with a Sunday school and help us start a church. All of that was from tiny coins. It wasn't a lot by our standards, but given to God in that sacrificial way, it was a lot. And because of that, many people were educated and many people were able to discover Christ's love for them that would never have done that if those women thought, what's a few coins going to do? You've probably seen other examples where that happens. Because when God takes it, he knows how to multiply it. Because when it's all said and done, it's all his anyway, isn't it? So it really doesn't matter if you or I know how much is a lot or how much isn't so much. In fact, that's one of the reasons here in this church we do not want to know how much you have pledged or your estimate to give. We don't want the session to think, oh, I have to listen to them before they give a lot of money, so I better listen to what they think. Or, oh, they don't give much, so we don't have to. Or, I don't want anybody to think that they don't get to have a say or they get to have more say because everybody knows that they're the best givers in the church. Because somebody who gives a lot, by our standards, might not be giving very much. And someone who's giving a little, by our standards, is giving a lot. Only God knows whether it's given out of trust in God, it's given because of love for God. And when that happens, and I'm not just talking, again, not just about money, but about giving our time and our energy, our service, every time we give to God, as little as it seems to you to be, it's going to be a lot. Because that's who God is. And all we need to do is trust that that's how his kingdom works. Because it is exactly how it works. Amen.